Thank you, Cindy. We are so blessed indeed. And if you'd like to get comfortable in your chairs and close your outer eyes if you feel comfortable, take that moment to find that anchoring place within, that place of sweetness and that place of wholeness, that place that we may have to put thoughts aside and worries aside to get to, but that peaceful place deep within us. And whether we need to take a deep breath together or individually, however you feel, do that now. The music you're hearing is Amazing Grace. That grace, that unearned favor of God, the grace that indwells us, whether we ask for it or not, it's just there, loving us, cherishing us when we open up to it. And this morning we choose to open up to that grace of God, and how amazing it is. How beautiful our lives are. How miraculously our bodies heal, and how we can go through every moment without ever missing a thought, because thoughts are there unbidden. And today, this amazing grace lets us pick which thoughts we dwell on. We dwell on the thoughts of blessedness, that we are a blessing. We are the gift of Spirit today. And we choose today to feel the blessing that others bring into our lives. We can call those faces up of those people who we absolutely feel blessed by, just by their very existence. We may have children, grandchildren, parents, extended family that bring us joy. And we may have families that we have chosen, our heart families, who bring us joy, who bless us in every thought, word, and action. We're also a blessing in the lives of others. We may or may not realize that a kind word, an idea, a word of support has touched the lives of others so deeply that they too feel blessed by you. Whether we acknowledge it or not, we have been permitted, we have been joyfully assigned to be the blessing on this world. So each of us today, as we start this new year, we get to be in that centered place and be the blessing that we came here to be. We don't have to think about it, we just have to be it. So as we bring our awareness now to our heart center, and if you need to put your hand over your heart to help your awareness of your heart center, imagine it filled with unconditional love for all of humankind, all of life in this planet and all over the universe. We are the blessing to this world, and this blessing begins in our hearts. And for that we are grateful. We release this into the universe, this blessing of our hearts. For this year starts our new awareness of our gift to the world. And we are grateful. And when you're ready, open your outer eyes. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Eileen Ramsey, Reverend Eileen Ramsey, and I like to start the lesson part of the service with scripture. And I try to make it align with the liturgical calendar. So it is sort of aligned with the liturgical calendar for today and sort of not, but it's one of my favorite stories. It's from Matthew chapter 2, verses 19 to 23. Actually, I just wanted to read all of chapter 2, but I don't have all that time. So this one is, the section in my study Bible is called Return from Egypt. So prior to this, the Magi came to honor the Christ child, and they stopped at King Herod's palace to ask for directions. And he said they're somewhere. Well, they eventually found the Christ child, right? They followed the star. And they knew that something was up, so they didn't want to go back through the capital where Herod was, because there was going to be, Herod wanted to know where that child was, where they found him, and they were supposed to go back afterward and tell him where the child was. And as we know from the story, it was to remove the threat of a sovereign taking over for Herod. So I don't like to go into the part about the killing of the infants, but that was part of the story. So Joseph receives an angel message in a dream. And we're going to talk about that in just a second. But the angel's message to him while he was asleep was, take the child and his mother and get to Egypt and stay there for further orders, right? Stay there until you receive further information. So, like the dutiful man that he was, he gathered Mary and the baby, and off they went to Egypt, and they stayed there. Now the story picks up again. And all kinds of stuff happens in Judea. I'm not going into it this morning. So, when Herod died, an angel of the Lord suddenly appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt and said, get up, take the child and his mother, and go to the land of Israel, for those who are seeking the child's life are dead. Then Joseph got up, took the child and his mother, and went to the land of Israel. But when he heard that Archelaus was ruling in Judea in place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. And after being warned in a dream, he went away to the district of Galilee. There he made his home in a town called Nazareth, so that what had been spoken through the prophets might be fulfilled. He shall be called a Nazarene. A lot of intrigue in this story, isn't it? My favorite part about this particular story is that Joseph represents our intellectual wisdom. He's the head of the household. He was older than Mary. He knew what to do in all circumstances, right? But not in this one. We hear that when he was asleep, the angel suddenly appeared. Now, we understand that angels represent messengers of God. That's what they are, right? Messengers of God. And we can also interpret angels in these stories to mean inspired thought, divine ideas, right? So suddenly, this angel appears while Joseph is asleep, and we can metaphysically interpret that as his intellectual mind is quiet, right? And this inspired thought comes in. It's okay, it's time to go home, but it's not quite safe to go home to Judea, where you came from. You have to go to the northern kingdom, Israel. And so he did. He bypassed Judea because Archelaus, the son of Herod, was sitting on the throne, and Archelaus was just as awful as Herod. Now, Herod metaphysically represents our physical world, our reliance on the physical world, our personality self, that part of us that needs to be right, that's dominating, that's a bully sometimes, right? It has to be my way or the highway. That's the Herod consciousness. The one that says, do it or I'm picking up all my toys and I'm going home. That's Herod. Well, Archelaus was no better. He was just as, well, particular in not following God's guidance as Herod was. Herod was all about personal will dominating. So we have these two ideas of personal will. We have Joseph, which is the intellectual understanding and wisdom, and then we have the inspired thoughts, right? So the inspired thought comes to the angel, comes to Joseph in a dream when his conscious mind is inactive. Well, we can interpret that, right? Well, he was asleep. I don't know if anybody else in this room gets dreams, guidance dreams, but I sure do. Do I get them every single night? No. But do I have to sometimes sit with them because the symbolism is kind of strange and I have to figure out what those symbols really mean to me in my awake time? Yeah, I have to do that. But sometimes they are really clear. Do this and do it now. Leave Egypt, but don't go back to Judea. Skip around, take the long way around, take the scenic route and go to Galilee, to the town called Nazareth. Well, and then we see in Matthew, of course, they have to refer everything back to what the prophets said so that they can tie into the story of Jesus being from the line of David and being the Savior and the Messiah and all of the prophecies that were in the Jewish scripture. So he does. Well, when we read these stories, we want to say, well, what does that have to do for us? What does that mean to us? That happened over 2,000 years ago, right? How can I apply it to my life today? Well, the obvious is, you got to quiet your intellectual mind once in a while and let God get a word in edgewise, right? That's the bottom line of this part of the story. You have to do that. But I want to tell you a little story about a friend of mine who dreamed about going back to school. This has been a few years, but she dreamed about going back to school to earn her master's degree and eventually a PhD. Except that her intellectual mind kept butting in. She caught the divine idea that it was hers to go get higher education. It was hers to do. There was something for her to do at the end of this dream, this idea, this goal of higher education, right? But her intellect kept butting in. It would say, but you're 47 years old. You're too old to go back to school. But you're female. Who's going to hire a 50-year-old female when you graduate? But how are you getting the money for school? How are you going to support yourself while you're going to school? Her intellect kept butting in. She couldn't get past her inner negative self-talk. But her sister also caught that dream. And her sister did go back to school, got her master's degree, and then at 50, received her PhD in child psychology. She successfully and happily practices in a suburban school system. She was able to explore past her negative self-talk, that Herod and Archelaus part of her, that bully negative self-talk that kept saying, no, you can't. Who do you think you are? You're a girl. Who's going to hire you? You're so old. What are you thinking? How are you going to live? Her sister was able to get past all that and say, yeah, but this is more important than that. This is what I want to do. This is my desire. And because it was so strong in her, because her desire was so strong, because it was no question in her mind, it was a divine idea, guess what happened? When she allowed that divine inspiration to take root in her, the doors opened. Finances showed up. She was able to get grants. She was able to do all kinds of things and helped children, which was her ultimate goal. She was able to be present for people who needed her particular light in the world, in that field, in that school system at that time. Well, she had to do her inner work first, right? Because she had just as much negative self-talk as her sister did. But one was able to overcome it and the other one wasn't. Now, I have this fun little book. I just love it. It's called Celebrate Yourself. Isn't that a fun title? It's an Eric Butterworth collection of his ideas and essays and things. And there's a chapter in this book called, What Are You Saying to Yourself? So he asks a question in here, what are you saying to yourself? He tells us that we can't escape ourselves no matter where we go. You know, you think that maybe if you move to another area, you move to another city, that all the problems that you have will be left behind you. Well, we bring our consciousness with us. You know, that saying, wherever you go, there you are, right? Well, it's true. Unless we do the work, unless we examine what that self-talk is, what that... are you guys familiar with neural pathways and neuroplasticity? Okay, so we used to describe those pathways as wagon tracks. You know, think of a wagon wheel on a muddy road and how when they're heavy, they create these tracks in the muddy road. And if you keep driving on those tracks, you're not going to be able to get out. Well, we had roads like that in Colorado. It was either snowing or the snow was melting, and we had wheel ruts in the dirt road going up to our house on the mountain. If you got in those tracks, you weren't getting out until you hit rock, because they were, you know, up to your hubcaps sometimes. They were just not, those roads were something else. You just stayed there. Well, our brains do a similar thing. Our brains keep on the same track of thought and the same track of feeling, unless we do something else to get out of the tracks. Those are the neural pathways. And our feelings help anchor these pathways and cement them into our brains so that we have this automatic self-talk going on over and over. And it's the same. In fact, in the last 3 decades, the researchers in neuroscience and in psychology and brain science and things, they have reported that the average person, okay, so average people. Now, in my experience, Unity people are above average in a good way, but the average person thinks, this is not the decisions, not the choices that we make, but just thinks between 25 and 60,000 thoughts a day. I would not like to be the one with the clicker with people, you know, changing thoughts. But have you ever not had a thought in your head? I mean, sometimes I'll ask him what he's thinking about, and nothing. He's in his nothing box, and that is a real place. There is a nothing box. But mostly we have thoughts. We're always thinking. There's always another thought replacing the one we just had. Sometimes we catch those thoughts, and sometimes they're like clouds that pass in our awareness. So 25 to 60,000 thoughts a day. Now, the researchers tell us that 95% of those thoughts are repetitive. That's where those wagon wheel tracks come in, that we think the same thoughts over and over. We wake up in the morning, oh, yep, got to go into the little room first, and then I've got to get my coffee, and got to feed the cats, and whatever those repetitive thoughts are. So we just do them by habit, right? There's rarely anything in my early morning that requires stepping outside of the wagon wheel tracks to take action on. Sometimes there is. Sometimes I have a cat on a valance that I need to get down. But rarely, usually it's same habit, everything, every day. So 95% of our 25 to 60,000 thoughts are repetitive. 80% of those tend to be negative. Remember, this is the average person. Unity people are a little more tuned in, a little more aware. So on average, the average person thinks 19 to 45,000 negative thoughts a day, right? We may not even be aware that we're thinking them. Now, I had the good blessing of Joyce telling me one Sunday to quit my negative talk in a sermon. I said something disparaging about being clumsy or something. I don't even remember what it was. And she said, don't do that. And I went, oh, of course I did. And I'm here and I know better. That's how devious and deceptive these repetitive thoughts are. So Butterworth wants us to start paying attention to what we're saying to ourselves all the time, all day long. Every thought we think, we need to start, and it is exhausting, let me tell you that, to be aware of every thought that we think. Holy moly. To examine it, I need to take a nap after an hour because, there go 10,000 thoughts right there. So Butterworth suggests that, and particularly this week, because last night we just released all of our negative habits, all of our repetitive thoughts, all of the actions and inactions that we don't want to bring into the new year with us. We left them in the fire, right? But then we have this repetition going on. So if we get to revisit, that's why this week is so important, because Whitestone doesn't happen until this coming Sunday. This week is our opportunity to start examining that self-talk. Did we leave it in the fire, or did we grab it out of there and take it and put it back in our pocket so we can revisit all of these things over and over and over into the new year, so nothing has changed for us? That's why this week is so exciting. So Butterworth says, this is kind of fun. He suggests that when we notice it, and that's always the first trick. I used to have a rubber band. Years ago, I used to put a rubber band on my wrist, and I'd snap it. So it would remind me, I know it's physical violence, I know. You could try something else that's not quite as harsh. But and sometimes I turn my watch around so that it reminds me to stop and think about what I'm thinking. What am I thinking about? What am I feeling right now? So Butterworth says we can do this. If we notice that we're doing something that we don't want, a thought that we're revisiting, a habit that we're doing that we should have left in the fire, in the bowl, he suggests that we leave wherever we are. Like, don't get up and leave the sanctuary. I know it'll be tempting, but he says leave the room where you are. And then take a walk, get some time away, get away from the atmosphere of whatever's going on, and then have a frank person-to-person talk with yourself. And he suggests, this is really fun and it's long, it's really cute. He suggests we say, now, you really are not acting like a child of God that you really are. Get rid of that broken record. You are not a limited creature you are making yourself out to be, but a child of God with the potential to be what you want to be. Face forward in the assurance that you could do what you need to do and be what you want to be through the power of your own indwelling Christ. That's pretty bold, right? Can we be that bold? Can we be that bold with ourselves? Can we be that bold and say to that Herod repetitive thought, that bully of a thought in our minds that we're not good enough, no, and stop that chatter. Okay, those of you who are parents, haven't you ever had to say no to your kids? Hey, my parents, God bless them, 6 of us. You can imagine the cacophony of teasing and crying and don't look at me. He's looking at me. You can. I'm sure you have all lived through it. Whether you've had children or not, you've seen and heard stories about other people's children. Sometimes we have to say that to ourselves. Just stop that train of thought. Stop that wagon rut. Get out. Stop. Just stop. Leave the room if you have to. Go for a walk if you have to. And then we replace it, right? This line of thinking stops. We replace it with, what is it that I prefer? What is my end game here? My end game is to be open to the guidance of God. My end game is to be the blessing on this planet for at least one other person, right? And some days it's for Jim, and some days, it's just not for Jim. God bless him. My husband's in the booth, and I dragged him to this church and made him volunteer. But he's having fun, so I hope he is. Oh, he's smiling good. So Yeah. So this week, it is so important that we take those holy moments, however it is that we can take them, however it is that we can stop ourselves in those tracks and look at what is going on in our minds and in our hearts. What am I feeling right now? What am I thinking right now? What is happening in this instant? And then, like Joseph, we can quiet that intellect and we can allow that angel of God, those divine ideas, that inspired thought, the intuition, whatever it is that we want to call it, we can let that guide us this year instead. I mean, what do we have to lose? We know what last year felt like, right? We can feel something else this year, something more positive and uplifting, something more joyful, something sweeter and kinder, something, that we can share with others. So I'm going to stop right there for a second. I found a joke. Now, those of you who know me know that I don't tell jokes. Reverend Donna tells the best jokes, but I searched and searched for a joke. So here, I have to read it because I forget the punchline. So here it is. An 80-year-old woman was recently married to her fourth husband. A reporter interviewed her and questioned the occupation of her newly acquired husband. And she said that he owned a funeral home. Curious about the other husbands, the reporter asked about their occupations. She thought for a moment and she said, well, my first husband was a banker. My second one, madly in love with the second one, he was a circus master. The third one was a minister. And the reporter said, these people don't have anything in common. What made you choose these people? And she said, well, I picked my first one for the money, 2 for the show, 3 to get ready, and 4 to go. Absolutely. There you go. I love that joke. It was clean. I'd never heard it before. It was clever. All right. So I'm going to close with this from the book, from Butterworth's book. It's the last paragraph in the chapter called What Are You Saying to Yourself? The person who forms the habit of rejecting the they say evidence of the world and who keeps telling himself things that are constructive has solved one of the greatest riddles of life. When tempted to slip into the slough of despondency, tell yourself, stop that. You are a radiant, all-wise, all-loving, all-conquering child of God. Don't worry about what others say or what appearances seem to be. What are you saying to yourself? God bless you and Happy New Year. Well, we have an opportunity now to share our blessings with our church community and with the world at large, because we tithe. We tithe locally and we tithe to Unity. So think about this offering, whether you give online. Those of you who are on Zoom, thank you for joining us today. There's a Breeze link in the chat window for you. Those of you who give monthly, daily, however often you give of your time and your talent and your treasure. Really feel how you are blessing. You are the blessing. So let's join together as we say our offering blessing. Divine love through me blesses and multiplies all that I am, all that I have, all that I give, and all that I receive. Thank you, God, that this is so, and so it is.